Good evening. I am Suzanne Lawson with Constellation Consulting, and we are pleased to assist the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department with the 2020 CYFD Resource Family Conference and virtual webinar series. This event is funded by the New Mexico CYFD, and our live sessions will take place each Thursday evening in August. For more information about the Resource Family Conference and our upcoming presentations, please visit our website at cyfd.org/Resource Family Conference. Today's session includes a keynote presentation, a short break, and a community panel discussion. For our session today, attendees' webcams and microphones have been disabled. To ask a question of today's panel, please use the Q&A function within Whova, and we will address as many questions as time allows during our panel discussion. Also, any materials provided by today's presenters will be posted as part of this session within the event app. Following today's session, we appreciate if you take a few moments to complete our session feedback by clicking Rate in this session of the Whova app. For those who would like to receive a certificate of attendance for this session, please visit the resource section of the Whova app and complete the survey. Certificates of attendance will be emailed out within 30 days of completion. If you need assistance during this session, please utilize the Q&A feature or the Ask the Organizers feature in Whova. You may also try emailing us directly at suzanne@constellationnm.com. Now, please welcome Acting Program Deputy Director for the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department, Emily Martin.
Hi, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the CYFD Resource Family Conference virtual webinar series. I'm Emily Martin, Acting Program Deputy Director for the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department. While originally intended to be an in-person conference, the 2020 CYFD Resource Family Conference became an online event with a virtual webinar series this year due to COVID-19. We appreciate the efforts of everyone involved in transitioning this event online, including our presenters, CYFD staff, and to all of you, our attendees. Before we begin today, I also want to encourage you all to download and utilize this year's conference app. This app provides you all with opportunities to network online, create discussion groups, watch recordings of sessions, download files provided by our presenters, and more. It really is a great tool for you to use not only during our live sessions, but also throughout the month of August. Today, we are excited to host the first in our live virtual webinar series. We begin this session with a keynote presentation by Dr. Mona Delahooke. Dr. Delahooke is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 30 years of experience caring for children and their families. She is a senior faculty member of the Profectum Foundation and a trainer for the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. Dr. Delahooke is a member of the American Psychological Association and holds the highest level of endorsement in the field of infant and toddler mental health in California as a reflective practice mentor. She has dedicated her career to promoting compassionate, relationship-based neurodevelopmental interventions for children with developmental, behavioral, emotional, and learning differences. Following Dr. Delahooke's presentation, we will take a short break and move into a community panel discussion. Today's panel will feature Dr. Delahooke, Betsy Hoxworth, a TBRI practitioner, trainer, and foster parent, Antonio Lopez with Western Skies and is an LMSW and clinical trainer, and Karie Griego, a LBSW and staff member with us at CYFD. You can read everyone's complete bio in our event app and on our website at www.cyfd.org/resourcefamilyconference. Thank you, and please help me welcome Dr. Delahooke.
I just want to say just a very warm hello and welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for being a foster parent, if you are one, or being involved in the fostering system. I am grateful for the work that you do, and I'm so excited to be here today and to share with you some of the knowledge that I've gained about working with children and teenagers with trauma histories for many decades. So welcome, welcome. Thank you. I'm seeing here that the volume sounds good, and that's great. So I'll just continue. So I just wanted to check in. I wish I could see you all, but I thought we would maybe start with a one-word check-in. So on your Whova app, Suzanne is going to read some of them to me. If you'd be willing to share, is there one word you can think of right now that describes your state, where you're at, how you feel, what's going on? Just if you want to put in one word that would describe, it could be hungry, it could be happy, it could be overwhelmed. Let's see. I can read them. Oh, that's
Yeah,
good.
Dr. Delahooke, I was going to say they are able to put it in the webinar chat. So
Thank you. I see them. Yep. Hopeful. I saw one overwhelmed. It's dinner time. Grateful. Busy. Yes. Oh, wow. Isn't that so true? Crazy time, but we are blessed. Crazy and tired. Yes. Oh, awesome. Oh, wow. There's a lot of hopefulness. This is so awesome. Tired, busy, multitasking, overwhelmed, and blessed. This is awesome. This is our life right now, right? Who could have ever imagined such a scenario that we would all find ourselves in? So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now, and thank you for that. And yeah, put in your questions as we go. I'm going to be talking now for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So we'll have a chance to interact and answer some of your questions. But for now, let's just get going and talk about what's happening right now. We have a collision, really. We had COVID-19. We've had this on again, off again, at least here in California, and I think kind of throughout the country, this kind of stopping and starting, feeling like things are getting better, then things are getting worse in some places. I'm not positive how things are going in New Mexico at the moment, but times have been tough. Times have been really rough. And we also had really an awakening of the pervasiveness of racial injustice in our country in really a new way in these past few months as well. So these are historic times, and we are seeing in our families and in ourselves truly this kind of continuum between stress, what we all experience of course is stress, but then for some people it can turn into toxic stress, which is something that is worse than stress, where it just feels like it's going on and on. And then of course many of our foster children and some of us as well have been exposed to ACEs and adverse childhood experiences. So there are many opportunities here to support each other. We need to do that, and we really need to support our kids. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So one of the things that is very clear is that children's challenges are showing up through behaviors, which is not surprising. That's how challenges show up. And I was thinking about like a third grader before COVID happened, a third grader who had difficulty keeping his arms and hands to himself and ended up in the counselor's office every week. So the parent was called, and the parent gets, of course, so stressed out to get that phone call from school. And then a 12-year-old I was working with who isolated himself, and he rarely interacted with anyone at home. And now at school, that isolation and that kind of shutting down and moving away from people is also increasing. Now, again, before the pandemic, we had 3.5 million students suspended from school every year in the United States. So we had a really a pandemic of expulsions and suspensions. And to me, what that reveals is that we have a fundamental problem with supporting children with behavioral challenges, because suspending a student from school is not solving a problem. On top of that, we had 250 preschoolers suspended every day. So our little ones are also getting suspended. There's a problem here, and I'm going to be talking about how we can kind of help stem that tide of suspensions and expulsions, but also help us understand children's behavior in a much different way. So I'm sure you all are familiar with the ACEs pyramid, the ACEs study that was done in the 1990s that showed that early adverse childhood experiences disrupts our development. It disrupts what's called neurodevelopment, so how the brain and body is developing at the same time through our relationships. So we know that being exposed to an ACE, at least one, and if there are multiple ones, really does predispose us to more vulnerability, and that more vulnerability to stress. And in human beings, what we see is that behaviors, like especially what we think of very challenging behaviors, they increase when little and big humans are exposed to toxic stress. So we also know through a lot of the research that's done at the labs of scientists like Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Bruce Perry, that foster children, because of their situations, because of how they landed in the foster system, have more vulnerability in their nervous systems. And I'll explain what that means, but there is more vulnerability, and what it looks like is coming out as challenging behaviors. So we see more challenging behaviors in children who have had a trauma history. This is a photo, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a photo from a play therapy session. And the child had a history of trauma, and she created this dinosaur parade, and you'll see a big dinosaur in front leading the parade, and then there's other dinosaurs she has around this little middle piece, protecting a tiny baby dinosaur. Do you see the red thing in the middle of the photo? That's a blanket that she made out of a smashed piece of Play-Doh. And that smashed underneath that blanket is a teeny tiny dinosaur, and that was her. And I think this picture just shows us this desire, this need for protection, for safety, and how desperately children need it in their lives. And again, when children end up in the foster system, they have had elements of safety that have been either not present or variably present, not present generally enough. So what we are very excited about talking about is how we are redefining our approaches to understanding children and understanding what underlies behavioral challenges, so that we can better know how to help our kids when they have them, but also how we can prevent some of these behavioral challenges too, which is really what we want to do. And so this involves a lens shift. So we're going to take off our old lens that views behaviors as bad, or behaviors as like something we don't want to see, to shifting our lens and looking at behaviors as something that can guide us to figure out what the child needs. So as a mental health therapist, as a child psychologist, I'm not afraid of bad behaviors. Actually, I welcome them because they give us a roadmap as to how to help the child. And we can't expect children, again, who've had many adverse experiences to have control over their emotions yet. So here's one way that we shift the lens. One way we shift the lens is that we think of behaviors as just the tip of the iceberg. So on this photo here, you'll see that, in an iceberg, I know you don't have icebergs in New Mexico. We don't have them here in California either. But I was in Alaska a few years ago and I saw a real iceberg. All you can see on the tip above the water line is like this small chunk of ice, but underneath there's 90% of this big piece of ice. 90% of what you don't see is in children's behaviors is what's causing the tip of the iceberg, which is the challenging behaviors. So on this iceberg model that I talk about, on top, when we look at a behavioral challenge, this is how our systems, our mental health system, our education system by and large, our social services system, and our juvenile justice system views disruptive behaviors. And I'll just read that list on the top. It says purposefully misbehaving, attention seeking, oppositional defiant, testing limits, lazy, avoidant, maybe the child had poor parenting. Sometimes we would say it would be because of inconsistent discipline or an intellectual disability. Now, that list that I just read is the older paradigm. It's the paradigm that we're trying to shift, actually, because those are descriptor words for children's challenging behaviors. But underneath the water is where we find why they happen in the first place. And the first thing that you see underneath that water line is something called physiological state. What is that? Physiological state is basically our brain-body connection, because as you know, we're not just a brain and we're not just a body. We are a brain body and we are connected through our central nervous system and something called the autonomic nervous system, which is a nerve that goes from our brainstem down to the organs of our body. And so this state of our system can feel really bad sometimes. And in humans, it feels really bad when we don't feel safe. So these things underneath here is our emotional responses. All of the stuff underneath the waterline causes the behaviors, and they're invisible. We can't see them. But once we know about them, we can really figure out how to help a child. So here is a big concept. In our current mental health system, we fail to find the correct etiology or the correct causes of behaviors. Because right now, oftentimes, we think of behaviors as intentional misbehavior and not a response or a reaction to stress. So if you see here, there's a bunch of arrows and a target, a bullseye, and those arrows are missing the target because in our current arrow cache is rewards, consequences, punishments, basically really trying to get the child to be on our side, doing contracts, asking them to do better. I mean, all the kind of stuff that we were told or taught in high school and college of how to help children's behaviors improve. But if we had it, if I had to ask you right now, I would say, do any of you have children in your home or children that you know who don't respond very well to rewards or punishments or consequences or timeouts or lectures. And I'm imagining that many of you would say, yeah, they don't always reliably work very well. Well, there's a reason. And it has something to do with our expectations. So currently, this is a question for you. They 0 to 3 Foundation asked thousands of parents, when do you think a child has the ability to reliably control their behaviors and their emotions? And so like, think about that in your head right now. Think about what age you might think. Okay, so you got that number in your head. Well, 56% of parents surveyed believe that children had that ability before the age of 3. And then of that group, 36% of those parents believe that children had the ability under the age of 2. And in actuality, the very beginning of being able to control your behaviors or your emotions begins at around 3.5 to 4 years old, but it only begins there. And guess when it ends? The ability to control your behaviors and emotions continues into the late 20s. So we have what we call an expectation gap. And an expectation gap is where you believe children can do something or have the ability to do something when they really don't have the ability. So it's the difference between what you think the child should be able to do and what the child can actually do. And in our foster system, we have a huge expectation gap. We expect foster children to do way more in terms of behavioral and emotional control than they are able to do, because the ability to control your behaviors and emotions is built one way in human beings, and it's through relational safety. So the one thing that builds the ability for self-control, it's sometimes called self-regulation, is relational safety. And that's the one thing our foster children had taken away from them or didn't experience for whatever reason. Oftentimes, it can be generational. And we also now know that in addition to the stress that is involved in our country, there's also the stress of being a minority and of being a Black or brown child. And that is an additional layer for our parents and for our children. So what I'm talking about now is, again, this vulnerability in a child's system. And vulnerability means there's some weakness there. And it shows up as behavioral challenges. And so what we want to do is shift the lens from saying behavioral challenges means the child has a disorder or something terribly wrong with them, to the child is vulnerable. The child needs more safety in their brain and body connection. So here's where we wrongly classify behaviors as good or bad. So when you think, and I say not you per se, but our systems, again, like in education. And by the way, I forgot to do a caveat, and I'll say it now because I just remembered. And that is that I always have my talks be a no blame, no shame zone. So when I say educators, for example, are in an outdated model, I do not mean any disrespect whatsoever, because in my field, we are all trained in behavior theory and cognitive behavior theory. So the stuff I'm bringing to you is very new. It is from applied neuroscience, and it's only really been in it's beginning to have practical applications, but it hasn't really taken a foothold in education yet. So if anything I say, you're like, oh, I've done that, or my child's teacher feels this way. Yes, it's okay. Everything that I'm talking about is outdated, is what I did as a trained professional for many decades. So I want this to be no blame, no shame, a ton of compassion for yourself and for the child. So I just want to put that out there. But anyway, when we look at behaviors as good or bad, it can only lead us to one thing, which is basically rewards and consequences. You know, we take an action to help a child, and I get that, but there are other things we can do, because when we view behaviors as an adaptation to the child's needs, so this is something that the child's brain is doing for them without their consent. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a few slides, but it's a different way to look at behaviors, because sometimes if you've ever blown up, and I hope you have, because every human has, once at least, and maybe on a more regular basis, I know I have, but if you've ever blown up and said or did things that you didn't feel like you were in control, it was because a different part of your autonomic nervous system was in control. It was the survival part that was defensive and protective. And that's the kind of brain many of our children are in a lot of the time. And that's also why our go-tos are often wrong. We blame the child. We say, oh, it's like a conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. Well, I believe that oppositional defiant disorder isn't a disorder at all. It is a word that they're going to have to change pretty soon, because it really reflects, in my opinion, a vulnerable nervous system, a nervous system that is sensing threat from the environment, even when the environment is safe. And so when we use something like timeouts, positive and negative reinforcement, or we're trying to think about behaviors as getting negative attention, it doesn't work very well. And here's an example. There was a child with oppositional defiant disorder before shutdown. I was in a classroom observing, and the very well-intentioned teacher said, if you don't control your behaviors, the whole class will miss out on 5 minutes of recess. And I get it. She was really trying to help the child understand that there were consequences to his behaviors, but social consequences like that increased the child's stress, because the child wants to please the teacher. And if you are familiar with the work of Ross Greene, Dr. Ross Greene, who wrote the book, The Explosive Child, he says, children do well if they can. And this fundamental belief that children will choose, and teenagers will choose to do well if they can. And when they can't, there's something else going on. So that's something we need to think about, that this whole idea that increasing discipline doesn't necessarily work for individuals with toxic stress or trauma in their histories. So the reason is that these behaviors that developed over time originally served a very important purpose. And in human beings, these what are called protective behaviors were adaptive on a subconscious level. So sometimes we do or say things as humans that is driven not by our thinking brain, but the part of our brain and body that is instinctual and automatic. And that movement, that type of movement, whether it was running away or hitting or yelling, any type of movement like that originally was meant as a way to escape a really tough situation. And many of our traumatized individuals were in very scary situations and they could not get away. And so we have the remnants in their behaviors. And what I am suggesting we stop doing is condemning children for these behaviors. We use words like aggressive, disruptive, non-compliant, checked out. All of these words describe children who are survivors. And so we can replace these words with protective, with being a hero, on the hero's journey of surviving a situation that human beings aren't meant to go through. Human beings aren't meant to be harmed by or mistreated by their primary caregivers. So back to this question, we want to shift from asking, are we observing a misbehavior, or are we observing an instinct, an instinctual stress response? And so the first question we want to ask is, how safe does that child feel with the adults in his life currently? And that will include you, teachers, therapists, everybody in the child's life. How safe does that child feel with the adults in their life? That's one question we want to ask, because right now our systems are viewing children's behaviors in isolation of their body, their mind, and most of all of those significant relationships. So here is a little cartoon of the I think I think Maslow said this: when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in our looking at behaviors, if all you have is discipline, or if all you have is timeouts, or if all you have is a sticker chart, then everything's going to be taken care of by that timeout or by that sticker chart. And we need to really blow up and blow out our ideas, our notions about how to help children. So again, just as this is an example of a child who was in the foster system, and he had an IEP because he had additional developmental delays. And at this point, I should also say that most foster children will have some sort of developmental differences or delays, because the way we develop as humans is through safe relationships. So when you don't have that, then it impacts your development going up. Now, that does not mean that it's permanent by any stretch, but what it does mean is that many of our foster children will probably also have some learning issues. And so in this IEP, there was the team, this child had aggressive behaviors, and the team said, we believe the behavior occurs to escape the task at hand, to control the situation, and to get attention from peers and staff. Okay, so that's why they thought the behavior was there. And then the solution, the goal, was to ask the child to communicate in a courteous and polite manner. So this is a huge jump. You have these instinctive behaviors that are survival based, and then you're asking the child to communicate in a courteous and polite manner, which is a developmental leap. And it was no wonder that this IEP goal stayed the same year after year after year. It shouldn't have been there in the first place. And it shifted once this child got an educational advocate, someone from the community who volunteered to step in and rearrange those IEP goals for the child. So the deal is that we cannot teach children per se to have self-regulation, because self-regulation is an embodied process. It means you have to feel it in your body. You have to feel what it's like to develop trust. And you have to be able to what is known as co-regulate. So you have to have safe people close by for long enough, depending on your genetic and your constitutional makeup. But you have to have those close people by you long enough to start to develop self-regulation of your behaviors. And so we are going to be asking, what I'm suggesting is that we ask, has the child experienced yet years of relational safety? And what are those psychic injuries? And how has it impacted the child's ability to control their emotions and behaviors? These are the techniques that we do not recommend: physical punishment, seclusion, isolation, ignoring, shaming, blaming, yelling. Not that any of you would do this, but these are the types of behaviors that increase the child's sense of threat in their body. And now I'm going to talk to you about these three pathways of our nervous system and what they look like, so that we can start to figure out how to help our kids. And that's what we're going to go into now, is what can we do? What are those things you can do today or tomorrow to help the children you work with? So when human beings feel safe, they have a certain pathway, a certain nerve, it's called the vagal nerve, that goes again from the brain to the body and back up. And when you feel safe, you feel green. You are calm, you are happy. You might not be overly happy like in this picture, but you just feel calm. You can learn, you can listen, you can remember things, you can plan. And in this green pathway, you really can sense it by looking at the child's face. The face is relaxed, the eyes are soft and looking at you or near, close to you. There's a sense of relaxation in the face and in the body and in the child's tone of voice. And when I say child, I mean teenager or young adult, all of us. When our tone of voice has prosody to it and has tone changes up and down, it's an indication that the autonomic nervous system is in the green pathway. The scientific name for it is the ventral vagal pathway, but I just call it the green pathway because my friend Connie Lillis named them with colors. I think it's so much easier to remember. So here's where we want our kids. But many of our kids don't live here, right? Many of us don't live here. Right now, I'm struggling every day amidst the news and wondering if it's safe to go out, and if me or my mother or someone I love is going to get sick. So this is what we have to do. We have to nurture this self-care to get here. But many of our children and oftentimes some of us are in this red pathway, which is the sympathetic nervous system. It's known as the fight or flight system. And when you're in fight or flight, I'm sure you know it, when your children are in this state or variations of it. So they may not be in this full-on whining, yelling, hitting, kicking, screaming, running away. They may not be, but that is what the fight or flight system is when we are in this state, we're running away and our body feels like it's under threat. And many of our foster kids' bodies get triggered into threat by invisible causes that we can't even see. It could be something like a smell. It could be a touch. It could be a sound in the background that reminds the brain of something. And then within minutes, you might have a meltdown or a change in their state, a change in how they look. All of a sudden they're gone. They're not with you, and you can feel it. So this is the sympathetic nervous system. This is one where things go bad, and there's variations. You can have you can have a child that starting to get agitated, but then you have this full on red pathway. Now, like I said in the beginning, the blue pathway is called the dorsal vagal pathway, and this is the one that indicates that the child is beginning to lose hope. And here's when children don't want to talk, they are isolating, they are, look at this child, just eyes turned down, they're not reaching out, they've lost hope in human connection. And we really want to be very vigilant for children who are in this state. If a child is like this for days, weeks, or months at a time, we really want to do everything we can do to make sure the child gets support and relational support as quickly as possible. I might add, in addition, there is data to suggest that our foster children are medicated with psychiatric drugs at way greater numbers than children in the non-foster population. So I am not suggesting that there's no place for medications, but I have noticed that relational safety, which neuroscientists will tell you is the best path, is really the answer to healing the brain, is relational safety. And many of our kids that are over medicated can look like this because they're tired and checked out due to the drugs. So we really want to have our psychiatrists on the team on board with helping understand, how do we get this child in this ventral vagal state, the green pathway. And you can use this handout and like thinking, where is that child? So now let's quickly go into some of the tools that we use. Number one, an adult state is the first thing we have to look at. Which pathway is the adult on? If we are in the red, if we are feeling agitated, upset, angry, out of control, we are not going to be able to help the child get back to the green. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what pathway we're on. If you're not green, take a moment, take a breath, make sure the child is safe, make sure you're safe, and do whatever you need to do to feel like you're back into your calm body. That's really important. And then once you do that, then figure out where the child is. Are they green? Are they red? Or are they blue? Each one of those will have different ways to interact to help them. So if a child is in the red, the techniques are going to be calming, grounding, coming back. If the child is in the blue, they are going to be more upregulating, more energy, more movement, more joy, more, well, they all involve joy, but just getting that that additional energy in the system. So what I also want to say is that it's expected for humans to have more red and blue behaviors, because these were, again, survival mechanisms that were subconscious. So we don't have to be afraid of these red or blue behaviors. We just have to be mindful of them. And remember that the deep fear and mistrust that happens for a child is adaptive and automatic. They are not choosing it. And so it's really not useful to use incentives and reinforcement schedules for children who don't have good control over their emotions and behaviors. And just because a child can have emotional control some of the time, it doesn't mean they have it all of the time. So we want to really start to replace behavior contracts and incentives with a developmental approach where we are actually building that connection to heal. And relational safety is what heals the brain. So let's talk about this for a moment. In the best way to help our foster children, to help our children who have experienced ACEs, to help ourselves if we have experienced ACEs. I have experienced several ACEs in my life, and I know that the pathway wasn't somebody talking down to me or scheduling me or it say, hey, if you're happy, I'll give you this or that. It was through connection. It was through joy. It was through being with other people who accepted and loved me and allowed me to have those feelings. Witnessing our child's suffering is a big deal. We can witness suffering, and it's so healing. Staying calm, self-care for you, self-care for the frontline workers, for foster parents is essential. And along with that comes a lot of self-compassion, because if you're hard on yourself, it's going to be really hard for you to be not hard on your kids. So coming to self-care and self-compassion, and actually the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, she is one of the world's finest and most well-known compassion researchers. She's found that parents of children with special needs and with additional needs who are more compassionate to themselves have children whose behavior problems get better and whose anxiety and depression gets better too. So it's good for the parent, it's good for the child. And we can just do this by remembering that these behaviors were adaptive and protective. So what we want to do is individualize this type of treatment for every child, because every child is as different as their thumbprint, right? All of us have different avenues that help us feel better in our brain and in our body. But what we do know is that a 3-letter word, joy, joy is a brain state that doesn't allow the brain to feel anxious. And so the main question I want you to ask for yourself, for your children, for the children you work with, what brings joy to that child and to you? We don't want the child doing stuff necessarily just on their own. We don't want them go off and just playing video games on their own. What brings relational joy? And here are some great ideas. It depends on the child, okay? So don't just assume that this will work for everybody, but dancing, music, singing together. Yoga is very grounding, very healthy, tons of research on it. Hopefully you'll have one of your speakers talking more about mind-body practices, meditation, yoga. How about taking hikes together and being in nature? Oh my gosh, the healing benefits of nature. Again, these have been studied. There's research behind them. Baking together. So find out what gives that green signal, that green pathway, the look of calm peacefulness in that child, and do those activities. They are very healing. And these are some other things that we want to do for our children. Predictability, routines. The brain loves predictability. And again, many of our children have had predictability taken away. The predictability of safety is crucial for these kids. So I would ask you to spread the word throughout New Mexico that harsh disciplinary measures or any punitive measures and even reinforcement schedules are not as useful as consistent love, predictability, routines, being authoritative when you need to, not authoritarian, but authoritative, being that strong parental figure that can say, no, I can't let you do that, but I am so here with you and I see your struggle. I want you to know you're not alone, but no, you cannot do that thing which is potentially dangerous. Basically staying calm through the child's storms. Don't take it personally. So many foster children get replaced in multiple homes because of behavioral challenges. And remember that the storms are automatic. They are not intentional, oftentimes in trauma. And the message, if you can give the child the message, I am here, it's so powerful. It's healing. It's beautiful. And there's a possibility that the magic of the relationship that you have with your child can last the rest of their lives, that they will hold you in their heart and in their autonomic nervous system. If you can present that safety network and work with the school and work with their social workers, that is what's going to heal the pain and the grief of trauma. And play is another one. Just play by following the child's lead. You can play with a 3-year-old and you can play with a 15-year-old. It depends on, the play will look different, but you know, balls, right? Tennis balls, big exercise balls, throwing balls back and forth, having this back and forth. Anything that brings joy into that system, our emotional tone, soft eyes, a soft voice, a relaxed posture. Think about yourself and think about what sort of cues your body is giving to the child. I'll let you read these if they're in your handout. These are the disciplinary techniques that are not recommended. And the foundation of trauma responsive care is relational security. Nothing is possible without it. Any tool or technique that we have is worthless if the child doesn't feel safe and secure. And please take good care of yourself. Self-care is not optional, it's essential. So I am so excited that our panel, we're going to take a very short break, but our panel has local resources and they are going to give you like the local know-how to do the stuff that I've talked about. If you want to learn more, I have a book called Beyond Behaviors. It's inexpensive, available on Amazon. And it talks about how I have helped children deal with trauma and working with the education system and with the social work system and how we can all get on the same page to help these kids. And stay in touch too. Please stay in touch on social. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Mona Delahooke or Mona Delahooke PhD. I would love to hear from you. I have a lot of free stuff on my website, blog posts, things, scripts that you can use for your teams. And this has been an honor and a pleasure to be with you. Joyful engagement builds brains and bodies. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm just thrilled to be here. And I will say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delahooke. As a reminder, if you have any questions for Dr. Delahooke or any of our panel members or our panel as a whole, please submit your questions through the session Q&A tab in Whova, or you can also put them in the question or chat tabs within Zoom. Now we will take a short 3-minute break. Please stay here with us and we will move into our community panel shortly. Thanks so much for rejoining us for this community panel. Again, today's panelists are Dr. Mona Delahooke, Betsy Hoxworth, TBRI Practitioner, Trainer, and Foster Parent, Antonio Lopez, Clinical Trainer, LMSW with Western Sky Community Care, and Karie Griego, LBSW, Northwest Regional Placement Supervisor for CYFD. And if I could request that all of our panelists go ahead and make sure your video is on and you can go ahead and unmute yourselves as well. Thank you. And for our attendees, if you would like to ask a question to our individual panelists or the panel as a whole, please let us know when you submit your question through the session Q&A tab in Whova or with the Q&A or chat tab with Zoom. And we will do our very best to get to as many questions as possible. So please have patience with us. And if we don't get to any specific question, I do encourage you to use the Q&A tab in the Whova app because many of our panelists are utilizing that. I saw that Betsy was actually answering questions kind of as we were going today. So please use that because our panelists are engaging with you all in the app. So to get started, we have a couple of questions regarding Dr. Delahooke's keynote. So one question, Dr. Delahooke, are you saying that self-regulation in children is mostly absent if they have been traumatized, or is this a trait in all children?
Great question. So self-regulation is a developmental ability for all humans that develops from something called co-regulation. So I'm also aware of the, someone put in the chat to please not use jargon. I am so sorry. I don't like using jargon, and so thank you. Let me not use that word. Little humans are born completely helpless, and what we need from our caregivers is to take care of us, and we share connection. The way we develop self-regulation from birth to 5, 14, and 28, it doesn't finish until we're in our 20s, is through when we have loving humans who are seeing our needs and meeting our needs. So all children will develop self-regulation according to how well they were taken care of in their emotional needs. And by definition, our foster children will have lags in self-regulation because the reason they're in the system is that at some point it was determined that the adults in their lives were not able to meet their needs. So if they were, there's a chance maybe the adult wasn't meeting the physical need and they were meeting the emotional need. Now that's a double tragedy. That's a failing of our system, because that child would have needed to stay with their mommy and daddy, and our system would have needed to give those families enough money to keep the child. But the answer to the question is all children we're not born with self-regulation. It develops over time through loving, caring, and attuned relationships.
Okay, thank you for that. And actually a question for both Dr. Delahooke and Betsy. What are some strategies that foster parents and CYFD can utilize to build stronger relationships between the parents and the agency? What are your recommendations for that?
Ooh, I want to hear what Betsy has to say. She's a foster parent. I want to know what you have to say. Help us, Betsy.
It is always, relationships have to be a two-way street. And a lot of times I think that as foster parents, we wait for CYFD to make the move. And we can't do that in these relationships. We need to be willing to ask the questions. Like, we don't ask, we're afraid to ask the questions, and that's a whole other topic. But build connection with other foster parents who can help you answer some questions and know how to phrase things. But ask, and keep moving up the chain. Because clear is kind, like Brene Brown says. That's what I say at my house all the time. Like, clear is kind. Keep asking the questions. And say, I don't understand. Ask for transparency of procedure. I don't know how this is going to work. Can you please tell me how all the different steps? And if they don't know, go above their, it's not going above their heads. They all should be working on their supervisory support also. And so take it up. The supervisors need to know if their workers don't know how something works, or that it's not working for you and for them, so that they can help that worker to be better, so everybody's not frustrated. So keep asking and move up the chain and be nice about it. It doesn't mean you give up, but you can be respectful. So yell at your foster parent friends, go to them, use that time, do that, and then come and be respectful in building that relationship, because it has to be two ways.
It's relationships is the theme, right? We have to build, and many of our workers here in California, our foster care system employees are overwhelmed. They have large caseloads, and some of them haven't had trauma-informed training. So relationships, patience, but we can be alpha advocates for our kids, because if you need any data to support your ask for your child's relational safety, I'll send you 500 references from journals. So we have the power. It's in the research now. That's the cool thing. And so we build relationships and say, you know, with all due respect, this is what I think the child needs, and here's why.
Yeah, and building a personal relationship with your workers and doing nice things for them that you can helps to build them as a person. We realized that we wanted support and nurturing care, so we have a nonprofit, myself and several other foster parents, Betsy Hoxworth and Kelly Sam, here in Las Cruces, and we realized that we were asking things that they didn't know how to give. Because if you don't have nurturing support, you don't know how to give it. So if we think about that as an institution, they don't really have that built in very well. So if we can give that to them a little bit, they can then have some to give back, because they don't have a lot of great support. So we try and do like coffee and community chats, and we go do nice things at the office. We'll pick a couple social workers every month, and we write them a thank you note from our group, and we send them a gift card. That's something we do, and that means a lot that they're both seen. We all want to be seen, heard, and valued, right? They need that too, and it has to start from somewhere. Sometimes we don't have that to give as foster parents because we're tapped out, but if we can, sometimes that gives them something to give back, and somebody's got to start the process.
Thanks so much for those responses. Again, to Betsy, do you have any recommendations in terms of, as we're approaching this crazy school year that's coming up, how to build relationships with the teachers, and really connecting the teachers with some of the behavior issues that they may experience?
Yeah, that's great. I was a teacher for 17 years. So I had a lot of these kids coming through, and I didn't know a lot of this trauma-informed stuff for a long time. And I learned a lot of things going through, and I had a great foundation and some good that kind of pushed me in the right direction, but there's a lot of things I wish I could have done differently. A lot of kids I wish I had seen with different eyes. So I think that there's some great resources online. There's a bunch of little like web videos. If you Google like TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention, and you look at classroom things, there's a bunch of teachers that have tips for other teachers that are helpful. There's a chapter in the book called The Connected Child. I think it's chapter 4, and it's online and it's available for a free download that's written for teachers, understanding our kids. So all the stuff that Dr. Delahooke was just talking about with the neuroscience and where they're coming from and that lens and how to build that connection with them. And that's written specifically for teachers. So that's a good place to start. That's not threatening, kind of little things. Teachers don't need a ton of stuff thrown at them either, because they're kind of right here, right now too, with not understanding what's going to happen. So if we can teach them to sort of see the behaviors, also it's like an unmet need, and have them to learn how to ask the question, what do you need right now, instead of stop doing that right now. I think that that's a good place to help support the teacher and not just criticize the teacher.
Thank you. And Tony, I want to ask you about the trainings that I know Western Sky offers a lot of different trainings. Are those types of trainings specific for resource families, or do you all offer other trainings that may be appropriate for teachers and others who are supporting the children to take as well?
We have an entire webinar series dedicated to New Mexico Western Sky Community Care families, foster families. You don't have to be a member of Western Sky, but some of the topics we do offer are trauma-informed care, successfully working with birth families, healthy relationships and attachments. Those are just a few of the topics, but I kind of want to back up a little bit to that relationship part. So we talked about the relationship with the foster parent and the worker, but we don't want to forget about the birth parent, right? That, you know, the whole goal of this fostering thing is reunification. I mean, obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but if we as foster parents can really mentor to those birth parents how to, you know, give them some tips. Maybe, you know, they have their own trauma that they're dealing with, obviously. And I love your slide on the iceberg, how that's just, you know, the behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. But we have to remember that those birth parents are crucial in that reunification, and we need to really support that relationship between the foster parent and the birth parent, and they can be of a mentor parent to help them manage their kid when they do return home. You know, communication is key, especially now during COVID. There shouldn't be any barriers for communication at this point in the game, right? So open communication, keeping that in mind. But yes, Western Sky does offer a lot of trainings, and I would encourage anyone on the call to please visit our virtual booth under exhibitors, and you'll find a link to all the trainings that we offer.
Thanks, Tony. You're actually going right into my next question, which was going to be kind of across the board for everybody. But what are some of the ways that foster families can work with bio families and really maintain that connection? Betsy, let's go to you first.
Okay. That's another thing that we're working on is how we maintain those connections safely. That's always a concern. With kids that come into care center, you don't know the families. Sometimes they aren't safe. So we have to figure that out first and make sure that that's all going to be good, but without judging them. So when we first got our boys, we went to, they used to do these icebreakers, and I think they're starting them again because we're really pushing for that we really want to have those. So I went in, and the first thing I told our parents is, I'm not here to try to take your kids. That's their biggest fear, is that we're here to just take their kids. And we just want to keep them and adopt them, and that's our whole plan. And that's not. We are adopting our boys because they were not able to go home, and that family wasn't able to be healed in a way to care for them. But we have a great relationship with, we have a really great relationship with extended family. We have a limited relationship with their parents. But if I could have given them, my boys, that gift of a healed family, then they wouldn't have to carry that loss with them forever, because it's a loss for them. However it is, whatever ends up happening in that situation, that's a loss our kids are carrying. And we need to remember that and look with compassion on our families. Every bio parent that I've met wasn't what I thought they would be. At first, we always think, oh, who could do this to these kids or be in those situations? And then I meet them, and I liked all of them. They weren't necessarily in the best place to be parents right there, but as people, they're valuable, and they have hard stories, and they've done some cool stuff, and they have had hard things in their life. And when I look at them with a lens of compassion for where they're coming from, because they're just those same babies, they're just bigger. They have those same things, and sometimes they need to get healed too. And sometimes they're able to work through that in a timely fashion in a way that we can reunify, and sometimes we can't. But that's always a loss that needs to be grieved for our whole community when we lose a family like that.
Yeah, thank you. And Karie, what are your thoughts on that in terms of maintaining the connection with the bio family?
So I would say that the relationship between our foster care providers and our biological families is probably the most important relationship. That, like, you are the people that they're gonna get the most support from. They're gonna learn from you. They're gonna have, they're gonna look up to you. You're taking care of their children. So they're not happy with CYFD. They don't want a worker telling them what to do and how to raise their kids. But seeing you as the foster care providers, caring for their kids, loving their kids, providing safety and everything that their kids need at a time that they're not able to do that. I would say the majority of the families that I work with, they do end up developing a really strong bond between the foster care families and the biological families. I would also say that our most successful reunifications are those where our families have a strong relationship and a strong support network. And they know that they're supported. They know that, like Betsy said, they were not looked down upon. We all want them to succeed. And those families where our foster care families and our biological families built a relationship, those are the ones where kids are able to return home safely. We know they're going to be safe. We know they now have a strong support network and they have, you know, something to fall back on. Many times, and this is something that we really encourage, is continued relationships. We want you to become part of that child's family, their extended family. So if and when that child can go home safely, then we would love for you to stay in their life. So yes, I would say that is the most important relationship that these families have.
Thank you. And just because of the questions that are coming in, I feel like we're going to kind of shift gears pretty quickly here, but I want to make sure that we're kind of addressing everything. So Dr. Delahooke, we have a question. What role does the frontal lobe of the brain play in self-regulation?
Oh, wow. That is a shift. I was just enjoying I was just like kind of glowing in what everyone just said, because so I'll answer the frontal lobe in a sec, but I love this idea that the partnerships between the foster parents and the bio parents and relationships heal. So to me, that sounds like the optimal situation where that love extends to the bio parents who get their heart's desire, their children back, you know, and that support can continue as a relationship. I mean, that just is beautiful. It's a beautiful model of neurodevelopment, because then the foster parents are also feeling healed in the process because they're held too. Think of a baby that gets held. You know, we all need this holding. Even if we're adults, sometimes we just need someone else there to say, like, I'm struggling, are you there? And then it just, relationships are so crucial. So Karie, I just love how you explained that. Okay, so frontal lobes. Let's think of those as it's the prefrontal cortex. They have learned that this is the neocortex, the last part of the brain that kind of develops, is this frontal lobe, which actually helps us with something called executive function. So think about an executive, like in your brain, like helps you plan, helps you realize if I do something right now that might not work well for an hour from now or a year from now, right? If I make a bad decision, this thinking brain, we can think about it, the thinking brain. Tina Bryson calls it the upstairs brain with Dan Siegel. So the upstairs brain develops over time. It's not online in babies. It's not there. It has to be built, and it's built through that shared connection with trusting humans. If your brain and body trust that you're safe, you build the frontal lobe connection. What it does is that it dampens down, or it holds back your automatic brain that makes you want to go into the red. It helps you develop control. And the reason, again, that our children who've had toxic stress or trauma have difficulty controlling their emotions or behaviors is that it's not yet built. It has to be built. And my reason for writing the book Beyond Behaviors was to give educators and systems a manual so that they stop blaming foster neurodiverse. It happens with children on the spectrum as well, where we're asking them to do something that their brain isn't yet built for. We have to build the structure first and then do the ask. But right now we're asking way too much in terms of emotional control of our foster children, because the prefrontal cortex has not those connections from that area of the brain to calm down the rest of the brain are not built yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And then switching gears again, Karie, I did want to ask you, and there's been quite a bit of conversation on the app too. Can you share a little bit more about some of the improvements that CYFD is making kind of across the board?
Sure. So there are constant changes in CYFD, as anyone knows who's worked with CYFD for quite a while and been a foster parent with CYFD. We are constantly making changes. Some of the more recent things are continued training for staff. I also saw some questions, and I'm sure we'll get to them, but I know there's questions about communication and things like that. So we have ongoing trainings, actually weekly trainings on different topics on how we can do better, how we can improve our practice, how we can have better outcomes for our children. So that includes having difficult conversations or having open, honest, courageous conversations, communication, customer service, meeting the goals of our children timely so that they're not sitting in foster care for years and years without a resource. One of the other pretty big things that we are working on now is getting all of our kids back to New Mexico as soon as possible and into family homes as soon as possible. We do have quite a few children in treatment foster care agencies, in residential treatment agencies, and in shelters. And as Dr. Delahooke was talking, I was just thinking about all these children who have been through trauma, and they have this natural reaction, this behavior, because that's how they are expressing their needs and their feelings. But I think overall, as an agency, everyone just sees it. Teachers, a lot of times we see it as a problem behavior that child needs to fix. So we send them away to a residential treatment center or a treatment foster home. So one of our biggest goals right now, or biggest changes, is that we really are working to get these kids back into foster homes. So in order to do that, that means we need to change the training that we're providing for you all. We need to provide better support, better training to handle these higher behaviors, because these kids are exhibiting some difficult behaviors and things that we aren't used to addressing, that we address with reward system or sticker charts or timeout. So we are trying to change our view to support you in a better way, provide better training to you so that when these children are in your home, we can keep them in your home and they know that, you know, I may mess up, I may have some difficult behaviors, I may get in trouble, but these people in my life are not going to give up on me. They're going to stick with me. Those are just a couple of the changes that I can think of right away coming on.
Okay, thanks, Karie. And Tony, I wanted to come back to you. I know when we were talking the other day that we were talking about how, you know, sometimes having outdoor experiences and environmental therapies can often improve behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to manage an RTC, and you know, every so often we take the kids out into the wilderness, you know, out to the Santa Fe Mountains or Sandia Crest or wherever, or even just down to the Rio Grande. And, you know, just their eyes would really lighten up, just something different. You know, sometimes it's going to take you getting out of your comfort zone and doing something new as well. But, you know, it's going to benefit both of you. And Dr. Delahooke talked about that kind of as on your joy slide. I forget what you called it. I forget the term you used. But just providing those opportunities for these kids and for yourselves as foster families. I know a lot of you have biological children in your home as well, but just getting out there and doing some new things, new opportunities. Now during COVID, it's a little bit challenging, but you know, social distancing in the wilderness, that's pretty much social distancing there. So just providing opportunities.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question that I think may apply to a couple of you. So The question is how, and I know we can't address specifics here, so please keep this in general terms. How do you deal with a bio family member who has become aggressive and accusatory towards a member of the foster family and maybe belligerent towards their own child? Karie, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Okay, and yes, unfortunately, we do come across that. So I think it goes back to building our initial relationships. When we get involved with a family, they're usually very upset. We've taken their children from them, like the most important thing in their lives. We've come into their life and taken that away. So of course they're going to be upset with us. So if we can build that relationship from the beginning, then usually it does take care of those things in the end. Of course, we're all going to have times that we disagree or we see things differently, and people respond to things in different ways, and maybe they, you know, haven't learned anger management. Maybe they need services to help them be able to communicate with this system that has the power over their children. And then you as the foster parent, they may see you as the bad guy because you have their child. But I think if we can get back, and we do still do icebreakers throughout the state, that's another thing every time, so that we can build that relationship. So hopefully that will limit those encounters. If and when that does happen, just talk to your worker. We're never going to put you in a situation that is dangerous. If you're being threatened, if these parents are being inappropriate, if they're making threats, if they're being aggressive, we will address it. Let us know. We'll never put you in a dangerous situation. We may need to pull back and start having supervised visits again. We've had some situations where we had to put some safety measures in place. Maybe that included security or having a visit in a place where there is more oversight. So there are things that we can do. It just goes back to communication. Let us know what the concerns are, and you know, we will address it with those parents and make sure that everybody is safe.
Okay, thank you. And Betsy, how about you? Have you or those in your foster family network developed any strategies on how to address these types of issues?
I would say yeah. So remembering that our kids' behaviors are, when they lose their voice, they use their behaviors, right? And thinking about the same thing with our parents, who also may not feel like they have a voice, and they can use behaviors and they can use aggression and accusations in the same way, in a defensive mechanism. I mean, we just look at how crazy everybody's gotten in the world over like the COVID things. Like, people just get accusatory and aggressive and crazy when we are insecure, when things are changing, when we don't know what's going on, we lash out. We've seen that all over our country. When we feel like we haven't been heard, they're gonna keep amping it up until they are heard. So encouraging them, giving them some grace in that, understanding that they're under an incredible amount of stress, that they don't know how to handle. They're probably not equipped for that. If they were, and they were well regulated, then they wouldn't be in here in the first place. They have a lot to learn, and they've got a lot of hard things to walk through. None of us does well when we're walking through a lot of stress with a lot of extra things on there. And giving them that grace and understanding that that's where they're coming from, that it's not about me, it's them. Same thing with our kids and their behaviors and their aggression. It's not about me. That's about their working through their problems and their difficulties in managing that stuff, and they have no idea what else to do. Like I said, remembering that our parents are still here. I need somebody to give me grace when I have days that I'm like losing it. And I'm, you know, I have a big support network, and I was very privileged in having the family that I had growing up and all of those things. And I still am not always well regulated. And if somebody, you know, like comes after my kids, like you get like, oh, wow, mama bear. And we do that, and we say, oh, that's okay, ha, 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 for us, and it's not okay for them. Why? And understanding what we would be like. So staying safe, but having a lens of compassion where we're understanding where that comes from and not just cutting them off. I think is really key towards helping that to heal.
Thank you. And I know we're at the 7:30 mark. I'm hoping that we can maybe get in 3 more questions, if that's okay with our panelists. I'm gonna come back to Tony for this one. We have somebody asking, do birth parents have access to these same webinars and also training such as the ones Western Sky mentioned? This person says, Western Sky makes a very good point in the relationship with the birth parents. So I'm actually going to answer part of that, and then I'll defer back to you, Tony, that yes, these sessions are actually being recorded, and we will have them posted, and we will email out that when these sessions are available. So I think CYFD would think that it's okay for birth parents to watch these too. And Tony, what about your webinars at Western Sky?
Yeah, for the trainings that Western Sky offers, you just sign up for them. I'm not gonna screen out birth parents, or I'm not gonna screen anybody out. So, and I'm not gonna put anyone on the spot asking them what their role is. So, sign up. I'm happy to train. I think the more knowledge a birth parent can get about what foster parents are even going through, the better they're gonna understand what they're going through. It's relationships. It's building that relationship. Being mentor parents for those birth parents, and what a better way to mentor someone is to learn the same things that the foster parents are learning. But yeah, I mean, even this conference itself, what a great opportunity for everyone in attendance today. Thank you, Dr. Delahooke. Thank you for the department for putting this on. What an awesome opportunity. So yeah, anyone can go to my trainings.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And I'm going to come back to Karie for this next question. How big of a problem is COVID among foster children? We've seen difficulty in respite care, and just what's the impact on the foster children?
So luckily we haven't seen too many cases of foster children being positive for COVID. It has affected us though, because we are limited in placements. So as children are coming in, a lot of our families are a little hesitant to take new placements because we don't know if they've been exposed. So that's how it's affecting our children more, just limiting them in their resources. Also, they are limited to being able to go to therapy. So we're having video therapy, video visits. So they're not able to see their parents. Things have changed a lot for our foster children, not particularly because they're been directly affected by COVID, but because of the restrictions that it's caused. So it has been difficult, but I think we have a good system in place to make the most of what we have and make things work through video and things like that. So, so I think we're doing well with what we have.
Okay, thanks, Karie. And then Dr. Delahooke, back to you for our final question. What can foster parents do to change the lens?
So everybody has a part in changing the lens. We do it as Betsy said, and as Karie said, we do it through relationships. And system change is hard. Systems don't like to change. And that's not about one person, it's about how systems are. So our education system is built on a compliance and non-compliance framework. And when we view our children from this lens, it is doing them a disservice. And I honestly believe that it's fueling the school to prison pipeline. So what can we do? We can talk about it. I also, again, I have lots of blog posts on my website that if you want to share them, I've got one on Psychotherapy Networker, which is it's kind of a very basic, easy to read blog post that explains the lens shift. And if you want to go deeper, the book Beyond Behaviors, we have financial assistance available to get the book at like 60% off. And so we just had the whole state of Washington Their social service and early intervention services read the book, 500 people, and they all did a book study, and I came on to help them. And I'm not saying it has to be my book, but please find a way to change the lens. Too many children are suffering, and we can stop the pipeline, but it has to be by advocating, speaking up, and don't be afraid to speak truth to power.
Thanks so much, Dr. Delahooke. And I know we have a lot of questions that we didn't fully get to tonight, so thanks to everybody for your patience. We'll actually see what we can do to pull all of those questions into the Whova app and see if we can get some dialogue going so that everybody's questions are answered. So thanks to all of the attendees who submitted questions. Thank you again to Dr. Delahooke, Betsy, Tony, and Karie. We appreciate all of your efforts towards improving the quality of life for New Mexico's children.
Thank you, Suzanne, and the whole team. Thank you all. So this has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, William, and everybody on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just to wrap up, please note that a recording of this session will be posted soon. We will send an email out and let everybody know that this session has been posted. We look forward to seeing everybody back next week as Barb Clark presents What I Wish I Knew Then, Understanding the Brain Behavior Connection, followed by another community panel featuring Barb Clark, foster parent Kelly Som, Donna Lucero from All Faiths Child Advocacy Center, and Anthony Beltran from CYFD. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great evening.